I've played few games that make as strong of a first impression as Wario World. It sells a character that runs like a dump truck but controls like a jackrabbit. It's bursting with viscerally impactful cartoon violence that feels like the look child of Ed, Edd, and Eddy in God of War. There's Valve-level facial articulation from an era when drawn-on mouths were still prevalent, and the art style and character designs are so hysterically demented, you could easily mistake them for some weird Eastern European shareware main game. It oozes personality out of holes that 12th grade biology never even name-dropped. I've also played few games that are half as padded, tedious, and singularly devoted to dragging their feet every step of the way. Ain't much this side of skin packs and daily missions, at least. Oh, and I'm not just talking filler levels either. I'm not talking time-consuming story detours or mandatory fetch quests or treasure hunts spread across a too large map, or mandatory replays and recycled content. In fact, Wario World doesn't do any of those things. Well, aside from one. This game's around 5 hours long with only 8 real levels, and it's grounded firmly in its singular gameplay style. So what does it actually do? Well, in short, everything. Almost every single mechanic in this game seems intelligently, almost diabolically designed to act as the most time-consuming version of itself that it possibly could without getting caught, and considering one of the most frequent complaints I've heard is that it's too short, I'd say it did a bang-up job of getting away with it. Alright. Let's reel things in for a moment here. Am I claiming that this often well-regarded hidden gem of the GameCube era that you there in the comments section are extremely nostalgic for, that changed your life, taught you the true meaning of courage, and stopped you from hanging yourself, is some kind of horrible game made by evil, fiendish masterminds? Well, no, obviously not. I do find its design foibles interesting, though, and if this channel of mine does have any unifying theme, it'd be the interest and intricacies of game construction. I'm a solo developer, after all, and most of my friends are the same. Speaking of which, Discord link in the description. So with all that preamble out of the way, let's elaborate on the first thing I touched on, both to be fair to the game and to give a bit of breathing room before we descend into the closest thing to gamer rage you're gonna see out of me. This shot right here, nearly the first thing you see in the entire game, is absolute storytelling brilliance. Wario's just sitting there all alone, laughing his ass off entirely to himself over how filthy rich he is. His hysterics permeate the entire building, all the way down to the basement, right up to the moment his castle is destroyed and he's tossed literally headfirst into an alternate dimension that this diamond monster who's evil for no discernible reason created, also for basically no discernible reason. A better introduction to Wario and this game as a whole could not exist. If there's a flaw to be found, it's the brief text crawl that even bothers explaining anything. In under a minute, the audiovisual experience alone writes and cashes $1 million check at the bank of batshit insanity, and things do not get any more sane from there either. Every creature in this world looks like it was modeled in a single draft off a coffee-stained concept sketches mined from the bottom of Rareware's back dumpster. Bulging, ping-pong ball eyes with tiny pupils that stare into empty space are the norm. Maws are almost always cavernous, toothless voids, and the most unnatural, unappealing Vaseline shine you've ever seen is applied liberally. A lot of games from this era have what I like to call the PS2 putties. Between the prick-your-fingers sharpness of the N64 and the burgeoning realism of the Xbox 360, it was an era of character models that looked like you could hold them in both hands and just smush them into little balls of flavorless unleavened dough between your palms. I bring this up because there are basically two camps. First-party Nintendo games, which often managed to circumvent it through some very intelligent use of polygons and textured-on shading, and basically everyone else who fell victim. Wario World, though, is, fittingly enough, just sitting there alone in its own little third single-tent camp guffawing maniacally. It leans into the PS2 putties, or the GameCube GUIs in this case, and it leans in hard. You can tell they're downright proud of how horrifically disgusting these Play-Doh golems are. Just look at this thing. What the heck is this supposed to be? Is this a female Yoshi? Is this why male Yoshis learn to shit out their own eggs? I mean, she definitely looks like something that'd forget and eat its quarters immediately after mating. Possibly during, maybe even before. I'm glad it's dead now. It's probably glad to be dead too, frankly. But then again, going by the racket it's making, maybe it ain't. Yeah, if you like the visual design of Wario World, you'll probably like the sound design too. Every single sound effect is somewhere other than between outpatient rooster vasectomy and polar bear with intense indigestion. Whoever recorded and edited these sounds cares less about peeking his microphone than even I do, and honestly, that's pretty darn based. Every single enemy howls like an oblivion scamp every time you tap the back of his shoulder with your knuckles. Instead of belaboring the point any further, here's a brief countdown of my top 10 ear piercing and intestine rattling wails from Wario World for the GCN. Yeah, pretty crazy stuff, right? Super funny, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now let's talk about the part where the game stops being funny. In fact, before we segue completely off a presentation, I'll just spoil it. Wario World is the definition of a one-trick pony, and that sadly even applies to its presentation. I'm a very analytical guy who'd love to go into more detail about the story, the characters, and the world building, but the game genuinely has nothing in that department. And while it never gets any less crazy, it also never really gets any more crazy. This frame, right here, is where Wario World peaks artistically in the preceding boss battle. The first major boss is also where it peaks mechanically. A few worlds later and you're just like, oh yeah, cool, a creepy green magician dude who screams a lot. Wild. What's next? Are we gonna reuse the shiny red underwear monster in a volcano? Oh, really? We are? That's an oddly specific gimmick to use twice, but sure, I guess. Keep 'em, for lack of a better word, coming. Now, to actually segue completely off of presentation. At its core, Wario World is a simple beat-em-up platform with some light-ish collectathon elements, and to be fair to it, it once again does get off to a good start. Wario controls well, a little slippery when you get into some of the precision platforming challenges, but for 90% of playtime, it feels great. Where the big problems do begin is the combat. Yeah, imagine that, a mid-2000s action platformer ruined by sloppy, boring combat. This one, at the very least, isn't immediately boring, though, and you have a good variety of different moves that don't halt your momentum and glue you to the floor when you use them. And honestly, that's half the battle won. You got a punch that knocks out small enemies, a 3-hit combo that knocks down mid-sized ones, the iconic shoulder charge that barrels through multiple enemies at once, and finally a ground pound for guard break and tougher foes. It sounds good, it feels good, and if it ended there, it'd be good. But notice how I differentiated knocks out and knocks down? Well, this is where the pony reveals its one trick. Technically, it's 3 tricks in one, a sort of unholy tricknity, if you will, and it's called your mad moves. Mad moves is a good name because these moves will make you mad, emotionally, within the first hour, and psychologically by the 4th. There's a total of 1 enemy type in this game that can be knocked out with your normal, quick, snappy, not infuriating basic attacks. All others will be damaged up to a point by him before hitting the ground stunned. This is your opportunity to pick them up and perform one of 3, we'll call them executions. The pile driver's done by ground pounding while holding an enemy. The wild swing ding is executed by just spinning the control stick around in circles while holding an enemy. The throw, I don't remember what it's called, but it's just a single button you hold down to charge. Once you've built up enough power, you can release it to toss your foe. They're fun. I dare say, funny. But now, recall how I mentioned there being 1 enemy type that doesn't require them? Basically, that whole combat doesn't halt your momentum thing I praise the game for isn't actually true, and the mad moves are solely to blame for that. I'm already writing more gags for the script than I'm frankly confident in, but imagine if every single sentence ended in one. And that was cleverly engineered to set up and pay off some 4D wordplay every time. I mean more like, do you know who else requires mad moves to be defeated? Do you know who In theory, a punchline should always be more entertaining than no punchline, but that just ain't how it works, and that's exactly what Wild Swing Ding and your 5th reskinned Triceratops guy feels like. The one saving grace is that all these will turn any additional enemies within the blast zone into collateral, but considering how aggressively they respawn, how many groups of them there are per level, the number of mook makers you'll encounter, and the fact that a number of environmental puzzles require the use of mad moves to solve, that's a very small consolation. Alright, so the combat drags a bit. Big deal. Is that really enough to ruin a cult classic game of this caliber? No, but the way in which it drags is deeply telling. I'd really like to see Wario World's design documents because I imagine they're full of nothing but great ideas, under which the director scrawled, add one more step and repeat ad nauseum in pig's blood after closing one night. There are treasure chests to be discovered off the beaten path. There are a lot of them, only there aren't any of them from the get-go because they actually spawn on these pads that are activated by same-colored buttons hidden somewhere else in the level. Failing a platforming segment sets you back to the beginning, is what I would say if they didn't drop you into a maze full of unkillable ghosts. Better smash every crate in the room until you find the exit spring, because only then can you start from the beginning of the section you just failed. Every level beyond the second introduces some kind of unique mini-boss, which you'll then fight 4 more times in slightly harder encounters. That's independent of this one stupid immobile statue monster that appears in almost every level, by the way. Dang, are they ever proud of that one.
I did it!
It also appears in every level are reskinned versions of the core 5 enemy types. Most stages do introduce a few unique enemies, but even those start getting reskinned in the latter half of the game. And okay, check out this one level gimmick. There's a room with a spiky floor. In order to cross it, you have to jump on the tail of this cutout lion animatronic thing and ride it across. And by ride it across, I do mean you just wait for it to cross the room. This is a challenge used multiple times in the penultimate level, by the way. The game just never lets up. It's so persistent that it even started making me see time wasters where there aren't really any. Like when you ground pound in snow or sand, you get stuck for a second. Ordinarily, that'd be just another cute little detail, but in Wario World, after that happened a few times, I found myself just thinking, oh wow, yeah, sure, okay. Now, while most of the game's activities are mind-numbingly repetitive, I'd be remiss for dismissing the trapdoor challenge rooms. Coming in 2 overall flavors, these little mini-levels are a rare case of well-spaced and well-paced content. Wooden trapdoors lead to indoor boxes that, while generally involving platforming, tend to be a bit more precision or puzzle-focused. Examples include strategically smashing stone blocks, moving along the surface of a hovering ball as it passes through tight obstacles, and a whole lot of lever flipping. Metal trapdoors, in a final act of defiance from the combat system, can only be accessed by pile driving an enemy into them. Diving into them somehow leads to the sky, where you'll take on some daunting platforming challenges that sort of remind me of a cross between Monkey Ball and those Pocket Universe obstacle courses from Super Mario Sunshine. Most of the time they're simple A to B affairs, but every now and then you'll get a weird one. As demanding as some of these can be, a very quick reset on falling and a bit of actual platforming that actually requires some attention to be paid arguably makes them the most engaging part of the game. The developers definitely realized they were onto something with the trapdoor challenges, because that's where they hide the red gems that unlock the level exit. Yes, of course, there's an extra step to exit in the level, making them the only truly mandatory collectathon, and don't get me wrong, I'm glad you don't need the treasures and statue pieces, but I'd much rather just have levels with slightly longer main paths and more engaging platforming along the way. Ah, yeah, the levels. They're fine, actually. Despite the core gameplay wearing out its welcome quickly, the stages themselves kind of carry their own weight. There are only 8, but each is very distinct aesthetically, structurally, and for the most part mechanically, too. They're more like Sonic zones than levels from your typical Nintendo games, and while you do have your stand-ins like forest, water, ice, and desert, you've also got more unique picks like a circus, jungle ruins, a magic house of sorts, and even this fairy tale beanstalk/furry genocide scenario where you fight Soldier TF2, Spider, Exoskeleton, Soma. Even some of those tropier level types have a bit of extra spice, like the snow level being a holiday ski resort, or the desert stage being this giant demon temple hosting a living wrought iron idol. Some stages even transform as you go, like Horror Manor starting out as a dingy graveyard, till you enter a Scooby-Doo spook house and eventually fall into an actually slightly unsettling slasher movie basement full of rusty machinery and deadly traps. There's some pretty flavorful stuff on display here is the point. The unfortunate but obvious counterpoint is that what you're doing for 90% of your time with them ain't any better for it. And while they do look and feel distinct, they don't really look all that good. I already touched on this game's graphics and style, but the positives I mentioned then only really apply to the characters, unfortunately. The almost self-parodic charm that elevates them above the sheer mediocrity they'd otherwise embody is absent in the environmental art. It really is just about every ugly thing from the 6th generation of gaming. The terrain's blobby, the decorative objects are sparse, and if this 40p concrete texture was stretched any thinner, you could probably see right through it. Sure, some spots and some levels look nice enough, I guess, but when I'm inspecting stonemasonry, the first phrase to pop into my head is spinach dip. That's really not a good sign. Seriously, why are these stone bricks running? What concept is this even trying to represent? Why does the texture tile vertically but smear horizontally? This sort of trying to be realistic style has never aged too gracefully, even in the games that did it the best. And sadly, Wario World is not among those games. Alright, I've been pretty darn critical so far, but recall I already said I don't think this game is terrible, nor even all that bad. I'm not someone who beats a game he's hating just so that he can talk about it. So then, what's the silver lining? What's the upside to this game beyond the characters being funny looking and most of its ideas being fun for the first 10 out of the 50 times you do them? Is there a reason to play through Wario World? Yeah, the bosses. Make no mistake, this game tries to be a lot of things, but what it actually is, at the end of the day, is a boss game. It's a boss game that clearly doesn't have the budget for as many bosses as they would elect, and subsequently needed padding in the form of drawn-out levels of repeat mid-bosses, but it is a boss game nonetheless. Every level has its own end boss, and all 4 worlds end on a dedicated boss stage, usually containing a more intricate battle of stronger gimmicks and bigger movesets. Not all of them are necessarily winners, but none of them are downright losers either, and more to the point, these fights are where all the pieces come together. Every boss is 100% original assets and code. They're introducing novel new mechanics that you can rest assured won't be dragged out for the rest of the game. You're using all your moves to their full potential. Wario's physically and emotionally bullying these cosmic horror monsters. Your mad moves are recontextualized from a boring time waster into these god-slaying Dragon Ball takedown attacks that just... The first world boss, Dynamite, might still be the peak, but honestly, no problems there, I guess. Best foot forward and all, it's a good point to go downhill from. This boss has more attacks than you'll even see from the vast majority of the playthroughs you watch, and there are no fewer than 3 ways to knock her down. If you want to play this like it's a Souls game, you can just run up and start walloping her belly like she's the Asylum Demon, shoulder charging and spin jumping out of the way of her stomps and ass slams. If you're a bit cheekier, you might already notice the yellow ball in her tail, and if you can break line of sight, you'll be able to grab on. She'll start looking around the room for you, but if you just stay on, she'll eventually lift her tail over her head, letting you ground pound her for an instant stun. If you were really paying attention, though, you might have noticed another yellow ball on the end of her tongue in the intro cutscene. If you hang out in front of her, but at a distance, she'll eventually whip her tongue out before pulling it back in, giving you another avenue to ground pound her noggin. All that aside, it's also just a really good showcase of that winning personality I already praised the game for having. The image of picking up this 5,000-pound dinosaur over your head, swinging it around by the underwear till its face starts scraping sparks off the floor and hurling it across the building and into a pit of lava is viscerally gratifying as it is hilarious. And that's why, despite having so many bad components, Wario World is a good game at its core. It's not a great game, but it is a great Wario game. What makes this character so special in the first place is that, despite looking like some feminist web cartoonist caricature of dad bod masculinity, he manages to channel that very machismo in a genuine but good-humored way. He's funny, but also kinda cool. It feels great playing a character like this, and there aren't a ton out there like him. So in an odd little roundabout way, despite having little to nothing in the way of world building at all, Wario World does kinda put you in Wario's world. That world just happens to be Wario himself. Normally, it'd be considered a bad thing for a game world to feel as though it revolves entirely around the main character, but, you know, as much as I'm clearly just looking for a silver lining, and while the effect was almost 100% an improvised workaround, if intentional at all, I think it kinda works here. Wario's an incredibly charismatic, larger-than-life character, and the set dressing feeling completely irrelevant and relatively mundane sorta enhances his mystique. I actually think that's a factor in why Adventure-era Sonic feels so much cooler than modern or meta Sonic, despite that first game having a presentation I describe as burnt crust frozen filling. So, analysis finished, strangely philosophical tangent aside, do I recommend Wario World? Yes, but that comes with a big asterisk. I do not recommend completing Wario World. In fact, I recommend beelining the game. Ignore the collectibles, don't bother taking your time to soak in the environments. Heck, don't fight any enemies that you don't need to. You'll be tempted to, because like I already said, the combat starts very fun and satisfying, but don't worry about it. You'll get more than your fill by the end without needing to go out of your way for it.
No, wait.
This game at its heart's a novelty that tries really hard to outstay its welcome, but the secret is that you don't actually need to let it. You're not missing out on any content, really, by making a mad dash for the Black Jewel. You just get a less rare NFT. Yeah, I think I can live with that. The sad part is that this was Wario's first and only shot. He'd never get another 3D adventure, and heck, one game later, and his 2D adventures were over too. Shake It didn't perform quite as well as they were hoping, but I feel like Wario World is what actually killed Wario as a flagship character. Mario, Link, Samus, Fox, even Kirby, regardless of how long it took them to get their shot at a full modern 3D title, they all stuck the landing on their first shot. Wario was different, though. He showed up late and he showed up drunk. He failed to modernize at a time when Nintendo still cared about being taken seriously as a AAA contender. The real sad part is that Nintendo took the exact wrong takeaway. Wario World with a proper first-party Nintendo budget could have been amazing. A game that's just 20% longer with none of the padding could have been an instant classic. Instead, what we got was an interesting curiosity, and an enduring disinterest from Nintendo. Even in an era where people are desperate enough for Wario games to start making their own, the real deal remains a guest star, reabsorbed like a dog's throw-up into the host body it once stood apart from. A truly sad fate for a character compelling enough to go from final boss to spin-off protagonist for his second ever appearance. So yeah, this is a bit different from my usual stuff. I ain't giving up on current and retrospective devlogging, but I do feel like branching out and expanding and diversifying and, you know, analyzing games that people actually know and care about could be helpful. Just a heads up though, expect plenty of videos like this down the line, but don't expect me to do them on every darn thing. In fact, here's a little confession on my part, I don't actually play that many games. Yeah, surprisingly enough. It's not that I don't enjoy them, and it obviously ain't that I don't find much value or interest in them, they've just become a bit of a lower priority, I guess. When I do play them, I tend to just find myself thinking, you know, I really should be working on my own stuff right now. I buy new ones very infrequently, too, so expect most of these to be on interest in oldies or evergreen games I've been playing a long time, rather than the hot and shiny shooters that dropped this year or the latest indie darlings. That's all for now, though. Talk at you later.